No film in 2018 left me feeling more profoundly disturbed and alienated than Ari Aster's Hereditary, a film that, besides all the occultic ritual drama that became the internet's obvious rabbit hole of ending explained and Easter egg intrigue, approached the traditional family tragedy in a way that felt agonizingly and unapologetically real. While I don't consider it my favourite horror film of 2018, that's something we'll talk about next week, Hereditary went beyond just a deeply intimate story, exploring familiar themes about grief and mental illness, and plunged into the tangible human fear of feeling unfamiliar in our most familiar setting. Culturally speaking, the family is supposed to be a symbol of comfort, support, and stability, but in reality, this isn't always the case. And what the film does is perpetuate this borderline existential vulnerability we feel when we're most alone, which to me is so much more unnerving than just being scared. Now, for spoiler context, the plot follows a grieving family following the death of their grandmother, and as we learn about the conflicted and shocking relationships between each character, the family's daughter is tragically killed, leading us to a frightening supernatural revelation where everything we just saw was actually an elaborate plan devised by the grandmother's cult over many years to transfer the soul of a demon lord known as Payman from the deceased daughter into the surviving son. Generally speaking, it sounds ridiculous, but emotionally speaking, despite its more unorthodox moments, it's structured in a relentlessly impactful way that feels very relatable and humanized. There is a blunt immediacy to the opening. We drop into the story seemingly in medias res, where we're never formally introduced to any of the characters or events that have already transpired. Instead, you have to piece together a turbulent family history through fragments of dialogue, characterization, and visualization throughout the film that get us to this somber opening moment. It's then heightened by this Hitchcockian perspective we're given as the audience, where the miniatures become real, evoking this uncanny presence that the family are figuratively, and well, literally, always being watched. Like with the miniatures we see throughout, the film is framed like a public display, removing a fourth wall and completely exposing the private lives of a conflicted family to outside intruders, creating this uncomfortable energy as if the characters aren't fully in control of their surroundings. Of course, with hindsight, this intent becomes clear, and the film persistently foreshadows the outcome, which we'll come to at the end, but what's important now is that the film firmly grounds itself in the cold, eerie atmosphere generated by death. It's that single frame of Annie's mother Ellen's portrait staring right at us that encapsulates something oppressive about the film. She might be dead, but her presence is still there, still watching like the controlling and manipulative mother Annie describes her as. What stands out about this opening, however, is that the funeral doesn't feel sad. Instead, it's accentuated by tension and fear. Watching it, I feel like an outsider, and it's clear that Annie's family feel exactly the same way. They don't appear to be in this close-knit circle, but isolated from it, carried by Annie's desire to avoid becoming much like her troubled mother. While not to the same extent, I can certainly identify with someone feeling socially detached from their extended family due to moral or cultural differences. Sometimes being in a family feels like being in a cult or sect where hostility can still exist in the most extreme circumstances, despite this idealized vision that society traditionally associates with the family. At first, I was empathizing with Annie's detachment because there's definitely traits, behaviours and ideologies I want to personally break away from in my future life as well, but as the film goes on, I found the real protagonist and emotional core of the story to be her son Peter. But before we get to that, we should probably address that particular scene. The thing about death is that nothing can truly prepare you for it. I have seen both sides, the one where it suddenly distorts your worldview because it's so unexpected and incomprehensible when it happens, and the other where you're preparing for the worst but are never ready for when it finally happens. Simply put, Hereditary could not have captured that destructive and suffocating feeling anymore. No pun intended. For the record, most of Hereditary's marketing material was centered around Annie's daughter Charlie, setting the expectation that she's the core focus of the story. And yes, while she technically is, I was not prepared for the film to pull a Janet Leigh psycho moment only 30 minutes into a 2-hour-long movie. Basically, Annie forces Charlie to go to a house party with Peter where she accidentally eats a cake containing nuts which she is severely allergic to, and while Peter frantically drives her to get help, Charlie sticks her head out the window to get air and a telephone pole hits a home run. The next 10 minutes were some of the most incredibly raw, provocative and cosmically terrifying I've ever experienced in a horror movie. It's unpleasant but not tasteless, and I remember genuinely wanting to leave the cinema because my anxiety left me sweating, shaking and confused, which is exactly how Peter reacts. Watching him drain of life, completely shattered, bewildered and unable to think as he slowly drives home, trying to repress the event, crawls into bed, leaving Annie to find her own daughter's corpse off screen as we continue to watch the prolonged, broken perspective of Peter, hoping that this entire sequence of events was just a nightmare, is pure horror perfection. The nuance of Alex Wolff and Toni Collette with their haunting screams carry the visceral tone of the scene, with the sudden close-up showing Charlie's grotesque head covered in ants burning the painful torment into your mind. It contrasts immensely from the cold resentfulness of Ellen's funeral, because here there is a sincere, honest love for Charlie that the rest of the family didn't feel towards Ellen, two emotionally distinct atmospheres I've experienced at funerals. It culminates in this complex drama where Peter questions why his mother Annie has become so scared of him given his involvement in such horrific events, but really I can't help but feel the opposite. Peter's character arc is rooted in how extremely unprotected he then becomes. Imagine having a caring family and gradually being pulled apart from them, where it leaves you isolated and susceptible to an unseen danger which we as the audience already instinctively sense lurking in the background. Peter barely has a safety net, as his father Steve is ultimately powerless at holding the family together as desperately as he tries, while Annie, who as the mother symbolically and traditionally bears the burden and responsibility of her children, acknowledges that she simply can't make Peter's suffering go away, and can't protect him because she was unable to protect her own daughter. That's where the theme of Hereditary comes full circle. The family are so interconnected and alike both emotionally and morally that, for me at least, it becomes so authentic that it's practically overwhelming in how open and honest Esther's presentation of the film is. I understand it's very situational and context driven, but I guess in a way I would describe Hereditary as a very aggressive therapy session. Hell, I'm sure some people might consider it an intervention, because coming out of it I was so grateful for my family and loved ones because I don't want anything bad to ever happen to them, much like this movie. And it essentially brings us back to this one core plot point that manifests in every aspect of the film. The real tragedy is that none of these characters have any control over their circumstances. Annie's miniatures are an obvious symbolism about control and conditioning relevant to the ritual, but effectively the film highlights the unpredictability and futility of life. For as much as Annie wants to escape traditions, labels and self-fulfilling prophecies forced upon her by her family's history of depression, anger, instability and neglect, nobody is in control of their future fate. In Peter's class, they discuss Greek tragedy playwright Sophocles, who in his play Women of Trachis describes the hero Hercules ignoring the foreshadowing signs of his demise at the hands of his wife, mirroring much of the film's literal events. If we attribute the film to mental illness or negligence, the idea of not ignoring signs of trouble is greatly emphasized, especially when considering the deaths of both Annie's brother and father. But instead of just regurgitating connections for the sake of explaining, or rather interpreting the plot to a film that explains itself in the end, the teacher poses a more interesting question related to Sophocles' other play, Oedipus Rex. In that story, Oedipus was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother, so he runs away so the prophecy won't be fulfilled. Except it's revealed that those people he runs from aren't his real parents, and in fact his real parents abandoned him as a child because they were already aware of the prophecy before him, and so he inadvertently fulfills it during his journey to escape it, leading to his mother hanging herself and Oedipus gouging out his own eyes in despair. Again, figurative and literal plot points that are in the film, except apparently the eye gouging was removed due to criticism from test audiences. The teacher asks if it is more tragic or less tragic that the prophecy was unconditional, given the characters think they have control, but in reality, they don't. Of course, Peter is naturally distracted the entire time, establishing the poetic irony of the discussion given his lust for a girl going to a party that led to that particular scene. But one student makes it clear that it's more tragic because it means the characters' actions are ultimately hopeless, regardless of what they do. As a result, when Annie realizes that the events were a build-up to Ellen's ritual of having the payment transferred from Charlie into a male host to rule over the cult, that isn't so much the surprising part, but rather it's how it makes you reevaluate the entire film. Look, explaining the cult stuff does a massive disservice for the film because it is something that is so overtly explained anyway. So without getting too existential on the idea, what I really love about the film is that it is clearly designed for a second viewing, not because it's one of those "oh look what I missed" type of second viewings, but more so it completely inverts the experience you originally had. Sure, many films are like this, such as The Wicker Man, but Hereditary is uniquely distinct in how we go from seeing this tragic world through the eyes of its victims to seeing it voyeuristically through the eyes of the instigating cult. It's unnerving to think how many instances of the cult's presence I initially missed, but there is this partial Lovecraftian philosophy where, because I knew the inevitable, unpreventable fate of the characters, I felt more in control of the experience, and had this bizarre sense of clarity to the entire ordeal that in my first viewing, much like the characters, I didn't have. In all, Hereditary made me reflect on my place in this world, or at the very least, my place within the family, the purpose of whatever role I feel I have, if any. Hereditary's true horror is demasking our self-importance, and making us face the realization that we're all simply pawns in a game that we can never win. Or maybe it's about why you shouldn't take drugs. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching as always. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Hereditary. And if you enjoyed the video, you enjoy what I do here, and you want to support the show, you can do so by heading over to Patreon and pledging $1 or $2, where you can get early access and even help influence what the next video could be. Ooh, that's exciting. You can also head over to Twitter and Instagram, where I'm on those platforms. It's good to see you over there as well. And yeah, Happy New Year! I'll see you all very soon. Stay safe. Didn't do that in the right order. Whatever. It's New Year, new me. Bye.